The practice of tattooing, whether it's done using ancient manual techniques or modern electrical methods, always involves a needle penetrating the skin and injecting colored pigment to produce marks, images or words. Two techniques are most commonly used today: the Japanese, or irezumi, and the American. Other tattooing techniques that are much less common and in some cases illegal are the Thai, the Samoan, and all those belonging to the ancient traditions of the South Pacific areas. The Japanese technique can be seen at conventions, practiced by tattoo artists who love to experiment with traditional methods. It involves penetrating the skin with fine metal needles attached to a tool with a bamboo handle. The skin must be kept taut, and the needles loaded with color enter the skin at an oblique angle, marking it with firm, fast strokes. Although the American technique is also widespread in Japan, many people choose the traditional method and are often driven by the ritual nature of this technique. Towards the end of the 18th century, following James Cook's voyages of discovery around the Pacific Islands, the practice of tattooing was introduced into the United States. This primitive technique was developed and eventually mechanized. A few prototypes were produced to make the ink penetrate under the skin through a needle in a constant manner. Then, in the late 19th century, an American named Samuel O'Reilly invented an electric tattoo machine that has remained almost identical right through to the present day. Since then, anyone who has ventured into the tattooing profession has had to build his or her own machine by hand. The difficulty of getting hold of one of those rare objects has shrouded them in myth and mystery. It has become a symbol, and for many tattoo artists, it is a popular design to tattoo on their own skin.
This was my first tattoo machine, which I made myself. It's very basic, with a Walkman motor. I started tattooing in 1983. I started out on my own without anyone's help. But I needed advice because I had no idea about tattooing or how to do anything. Needles, for example, I learned all about them on my own. This is another kind of machine I built back then, but I got the frame dimensions a bit wrong. It's quite different to a normal machine. Then I moved on to this one, which is even smaller than the ones I use now, but it has a much slower movement. The ones we have now are much better.
I don't want to consider myself as an ex-tattoo artist, but these days I spend a lot more time on the production of my machines. It all started not so long ago, in 1996. Well, the actual production started in 1996, but the desire to produce my own machines came long before that. I was in Brazil when I got my first tattoo. I wasn't so young anymore, but I fell in love with it straight away. I'd spend whole days inside this little tattoo studio, and I bought my first machine there. I came back to Italy and took it apart. It was quite an awful machine, but it really fascinated me. It didn't even work, and I didn't have a clue about it. So I showed it some friends who knew about electrical appliances, and they told me it was a typical doorbell construction and they could get it working again.
Ci pensiamo noi a risolverla, a sistemare questa macchina.
I welded this part here onto a piece of metal I already had. I cut it out with a small saw, and it was Lauro's Rogers, the number 000.
Lauro, che era il numero 000.
It has only been in the last 2 decades, with the boom in tattooing and resulting increased number of tattoo artists, that specialist companies have been founded to produce and sell tattoo machines. The latest technology has enabled great progress in the development of this tool, and it is highly likely that in a few years it will be transformed and almost unrecognizable. But the appeal of the traditional, old-style machine will never die.